And if you can hear us on the radio, you can also hear us on the radio by going to Z98.1 FM. On Conversation with Tony Mobley today, I am talking to Mr. Nigel Dessau. That's right, Mr. Nigel Dessau, CEO of Bravos. This is episode 78 of Conversations with Tony Mobley. Thanks to everyone for being a part of the journey. And I want to thank the team behind Conversation with Tony Mobley for all of their hard work. Thank you all so much. And there's a lot more to say, but I want you to go to Makana and put in your questions so that you can ask Nigel the questions that you want to ask him about his company and about his life, so that we can have a meaningful conversations. You can go to conversationwithtonymobley.com, and there you can participate in the Mukana chat. The Mukana chat gives you this opportunity to put your question in, and your question can be voted up and down. And now, without any further delay, we're going to start our conversation with Mr. Nigel Dessau. Thank you, Nigel, so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's great. Great to be here.
The very first question, as always, on Conversation with Tony Mobley is who you are. So who is Mr. Nigel Dessau?
Well, because I know that's your secret first question. I've been trying to think of the answer. And it occurs to me, Tony, that there's like multiple different layers for me to this answer. I think the first thing people will notice that I don't speak with your typical American accent. I live in Austin, Texas. I often jokingly tell people I speak with an East Austin accent, very East. Clearly, I was born in the UK. I've lived in the US for 25 years. I'm now an American citizen. I'm married, so I'm a husband. By profession, I've really been in the technology industry, mostly focused on marketing. But I think the real answers to who I am is I really am a child of my parents. So my father is a Holocaust escapee, and he taught me a lot of things about life and about the importance of things around business and stuff like that. My mother taught me humility and sensitivity. So I like to think that I'm sort of the best of both of them.
Well, I can't let you go any further without talking a little bit more about what your father has shared with you based on the fact that he was an escapee and a survivor. So can you share a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, and I think the distinction is important. At least I've learned it to be important, that when you typically hear about a Holocaust survivor, you typically think about someone who was in a camp. My father was not in a camp. His father was smart enough to make a run for it after running with the law in 1934, leaving my grandma was a little lady, his mother and his brother, to escape in 35. So they went to live in England in 1935. So we're very careful that he escaped. He saw lots of stuff that was very frightening. He remembers he was 9 when he left. He's still alive today. But he wasn't a survivor, and I think that's important. And it's important because survivors went through concentration camps. Much of our family didn't survive, and I think one wants to have that differential. But, he did escape. He came to a new country. He learned a new language. He became a British citizen, and everything in his eyes, and I think in our family's eyes, is looked at through the blessing of someone who gave us a home, someone who supported us. It is an immigrant story, which much of the Jewish religion the last few hundred years has been. And it makes you stop and think and look about and remember that life for those before us, for our forebears, were much more complicated than us, were much harder for us. And while we take the joys and the blessings we have today, remembering those and not forgetting the lessons that taught us is a pretty important thing to do.
So I'm going to ask you a bit of a personal question, and it's just really an outgrowth of just really wanting to get some information, and I'll give you a context in which I asked this question. As a young child, um, my parents chose not to talk about the history of slavery. They did not want to talk about it. They um, they talked about it from the standpoint of that it was something that happened, but it was something that they did not talk about. Can you talk about how your your father was able to share with you the lessons of what you were able to escape from, and the fact that you did say that you had some family members who did not survive? How were you able to be able to talk about it in a way that allowed you not to relish in the pain of it, but also be able to move beyond it, to, to do the things that you were able to do?
So I think there are lots of thoughts on that now, and I'll share a couple of them. My father has on the sort of rogues gallery of pictures at home a picture taken in Lotz, Germany, I think in 1909 or something. And as I remember this story, and we all know that we remember stories differently, the one person on there that he knew was his father, my grandfather, and he was the only person that survived the war. And so that picture of this family grouping is a very strong image in my mind. And one of the things we do at Passover as Jews is we tell the story of the leaving of Egypt. And what we've always done in our family is not only tell that story, but remind ourselves that that story is repeated for our family, and today is being repeated by other families all over the world. And that is, I think, the thing that I'm left most with from that. I mean, other than I think the anti-Jewish racism is different from what I think the your community went through. I think these are different things. They're on different scales. We were never put through, I think, what the Black community in America was. But we know our own type of racism, particularly because I was mostly at Christian schools, and kids are stupid. But really, it's the remembrance that not only what my family went through, but today there are families all over the world that continue to go through that. That I think is the lesson and the lens that I get left with.
Thank you for that. The next question is, can you share your career path?
Yeah, so I'm dyslexic, so I was never very good at the academics. And in the UK, the exams you do at 18, which were called A levels, were very important, and they decided what university you got into, or in my case, the university I didn't get into. I didn't get into university, and I went to a more technical college, but was very lucky to get a job with IBM through a family friend, and as a sort of internship. And the end of the internship, they offered me a job, and normally they really wouldn't offer anyone who hadn't gone to an Ivy League school, but I managed to sneak in. And I spent 20 years at IBM, first in the UK, first 10 years in the UK, and then the second 10 years in the US. And I really got the best training ever. I owe much of my success not only to my family, but to the IBMers and the mentors and the people that spent time with me and helped me. I left IBM in 2005 to go to a company as their chief marketing officer. That company got bought by Sun Microsystems, and I went through a series of chief marketing officer's jobs, including Advanced Micro Devices here in Austin, and then sort of took a rest for a while. I came back, did some startup work, particularly with a healthcare company, and then joined the company I'm at, Bravus. And I would tell you that amongst all of those roles, really since about 2005, for the last 20 years, mostly what I've done is I've booted or rebooted marketing teams or business teams to help them get to a better place.
Can you talk about you? So you had this infrastructure of IBM and Sun Systems. Can you talk about the things that you did that were outside of what was the professional development of the job to help you continue to move forward?
Yeah, I think one of the great things, at least it was in the IBM in the 80s, that if you worked in the UK company versus the US company, was this huge business, in the UK company, we had relatively little resource, and therefore resourcefulness was the most important thing you could be. And you learn not to wait for somebody else to do something, but you learn to do it for yourself. And that, I think, drove my career. At the same time, as a 20-year-old, I was part of an organization called Rotaract, which is the sort of junior version of Rotary International for the 18 to 30-year-olds. And that really gave me a chance to work in the community, to do fundraising, and it gave me a very balanced life at the time. So my 20s, well, I wasn't settling down and having a family. What I was doing was I was working pretty hard, but I was also involved in my community, and I found that there was a way to make both those sides work for me. And it was because in both of those sides, I found mentors, I found coaches, and I found people. And I was never scared to ask. I never had a problem saying, I don't know what to do. I was never being one of the things about being dyslexic, just to take a minor detour, is once you work out you're dyslexic, you work out pretty quickly there's a bunch of stuff you can't do. You're just not good at a bunch of stuff. So you start to think about, well, what am I good at? And I never lacked the confidence in the things that I was good at. I never had a problem applying myself to those, which meant I never had a problem asking help where I wasn't, because I knew not everybody knew everything. And I was lucky enough to find mentors and coaches and other people who were willing to fill in the gaps that I clearly had.
Very cool. Thank you so much for that. Um, the next question is, please explain your path to becoming CEO of Bravas. And before you answer, I want to say to our audience, producers, we need questions. Give us some questions. This is not an opportunity that you want to miss. Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you,
so
Nigel.
yeah, so I'd actually always really avoided being a CEO. I actually have found the most pleasure being the number two, or the support, or the side person to the senior person, because I really learned early on that the best thing you can do is help someone else be successful. So that was always my mission, and I joined Bravas as a company that focuses on installing technology into luxury homes. And I joined as the chief marketing officer to help them try and build a national brand. And I got the opportunity, because of a change in leadership, to step up to the CEO role. And again, I'm not sure that was exactly what I wanted to do, but it was placed in the context, for me at least, of you can help make this better. You can help get this team. And we were brought together by 15 or 20 small companies. Most of the people didn't have large company experience, and that's what I sort of brought with me. So I was able to step into that role. And again, I am not the content expert. I'm not the subject matter expert. My role is to try and help this team come together to achieve, everything it needs to be. So I'm still trying to support the team rather than naturally be the leader of it.
Can you talk about the types of homes that Bravas works with,
Yeah, so
homeowners?
yeah. So we work in some of the most amazing homes in the world. I mean, it's not unusual for us to work in homes that are tens of millions of dollars. And so maybe the best way to think about this is that when you buy a house, particularly a brand new house, or if you're building a house, you need high voltage, which is the power in your lighting and your air conditioning. But more and more, we're doing low voltage stuff. We're doing home automation, we're doing shades, we're doing audio, we're doing video. And what we do is work on that low voltage stuff. And we do everything from, small to medium-sized houses to some of the biggest houses in the country. And I will tell you, we do jobs from helping people, with their 2 or 3 thousand square foot house, to a job where recently we put $1 million home theater in somebody's house. So it's really the higher end of the business. It's really the luxury end. If you're a DIY person, you love doing this yourself, that's great. You don't need us. We're not someone who can do it for you. We're someone who you say, I really want my whole home to be automated and managed and controlled and really easy to use. And so I need someone to come and help us do that. And so that's sort of what we work. And we're spread around the country in 15 different cities. So from all the way from the East Coast near you in what we call our Atlantic region, all the way to the West Coast in San Francisco.
That's very cool. I'm curious, do you have sort of an upgrade policy with your clients? Do you come in and put in this great system, and then as technology improves, you come back, or is it kind of a one and done kind of deal?
I think it's, to be honest with you, it's both. I think mostly what you want to do is build the right infrastructure. So put enough networking, enough technology in to make them operate this house. I'll give you an example. We wired a house a couple of years ago that had 196 shades in it. So, that's a lot of windows. And that's a
Hmm,
thing you do only once. But we
right.
put, I don't know, 50, 60 televisions in. This was a very big house. And we'll go back and we'll upgrade some of the televisions. And, you know, um, we put today, one of the hot things is 100-inch television. So people want to watch the 100-yard Super Bowl on a 100-inch television. So we'll often go back and upgrade those. We're seeing the emergence of people listening again to great music. So we're doing a lot of what we would call two-channel, which everyone else would probably think of as stereo sound systems. We're seeing people upgrade their home theaters. I'll tell you, one of the interesting things, Tony, was that one of the things that happened when I joined the company in 2019 is people said nobody uses home theaters anymore. Nobody uses private cinemas. And then COVID hit. And of course, we
Mm,
weren't going to theaters and we weren't going to cinemas. And people started to reuse their home theaters and people started to create private cinemas. And that's reboosted that business particularly. And so you'd go back and you'd upgrade. But basically, you're like when you build a house, you get the right foundation in, and then you can redecorate the rooms and change the lights and do stuff like that. But you want to get the right foundation in first.
do you interact with construction companies and architects to design things as is that part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would tell you the majority of our business is working with builders and designers and architects who will have a client they're building a home for. And the architect or will say, well, I don't really do the low voltage stuff. And the builder will say, I don't really do that. And they'll bring us in because I love builders. But when the builders build you a house, they never want to talk to you again. I mean, they want to hand you the key and they never want to hear from you again because they want to go and sell the new house. And obviously, if there are things you need, they'll help you with that. But when you work with a company like us, it's a very long-term relationship. Technology changes, things get upgraded, as you said. And so we're building a long-term relationship with these clients. I mean, one of the things we're doing for a lot of the people at the moment is upgrading their security systems. So that's a relationship that the builder introduces us to, and then we build on with that with the homeowner themselves.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, I want to say thank you so much for being here with me. And we have a question from the questions from Taylor Sunderhouse. How did you discover your disability? I discovered my disability in the fourth grade by a school teacher. And that's from Taylor Sunderhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think of it as a disability. I think it is. I mean, dyslexia is a mild disability compared to many, but it's a learning difficulty. And like Taylor, you know, I went well, so I went for an exam when I was probably 7 or 8 to get into a local private school in England, and which was a really very good school. And they called my parents back and they said, "There's a problem because he scored really well in the maths, or maths as we call it, or math as you call it, but his English was terrible. So there's something wrong." So they tested me again. They said, "No, he doesn't qualify." And so I went to it. I went to a different school, and someone was smart enough to say to my parents, "You should have him tested for dyslexia." And I'm probably one of the first generation of kids that anybody did that for. And we were very lucky that we were able to go and get tested. And they came back and said, "Yeah, I mean, he's in the top 25%, of intelligence for his age group, with the bottom 25% language skills." And so there was clearly a mismatch. But if it hadn't been from school through teachers about the same age as Taylor, I have to tell you, Tony, I want to make it. I don't have many regrets in my life because I've been a very lucky person, but I have one sort of regret. There was a lady at school who did extra work with me 2 or 3 times a week to help me with my dyslexia. I don't know I ever gave her the credit. I don't know. I wish I could go back. Maybe I can do one day and say to her, "I don't know I ever really said thank you to you." But without Mrs. Blackmore was her name, without her and without the people who took time and care and attention, I might not be where I am today. And I'm very sensitive to that.
I want to say that I think all of us have that one person during our early childhood that went the extra mile and did more than what their job required them to do. So I hear you, and we probably don't say thank you enough to those individuals who we don't even sometimes recognize that they are helping us in the way that they are at the time.
No, and I definitely didn't recognize that. I mean, it was a chore to me. I had to go out of my normal classes. I had to go and sit in a room. I had to, do the rote exercises. And I definitely didn't appreciate it. And I definitely didn't like it. None of us as kids want to do anything different from anybody else. Anything that calls us out as different or makes us feel different, opens you up for difficulties. But it was a really important thing that Mrs. Blackmore did for me, and I will always be grateful.
Do you think it turned into a superpower in a way?
I think I'm lucky that in many ways, Tony, but I absolutely think that's a very good observation. I think that if you can find something that you're good at and people encourage it, it turns it into a superpower for you. But also, I think, as I said before, um, accepting there are things you can't do, um, I think is a very important lesson in life. It is that we're not great. I always worry about those kids, and I see them as new graduates who leave from university, and they've had a fairly easy time at school, and they've had a fairly easy time at university, and they may have gone straight from doing a degree to a postgraduate degree, and they come to work, and life is suddenly very complicated. There are suddenly people who are smarter, as smart as them, who are more experienced than them, and they hit for the first time, a wall where they don't know all the answers and they haven't got all the right things. And I think knowing early on in your life that there's a gap that you're going to have to cross gives you an advantage that sometimes being lucky all the way up to that point doesn't give you.
Nigel, I was thinking as you were talking about one of the experiences that I had when I was in college. I went as an older student, and most of the time that I was in school, I worked several jobs at the same time, and managed to get fairly decent grades. But I was an older student. But one of the really powerful moments that I had was that I had an opportunity to interview Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, who was the president of Morehouse College during the time that Martin Luther King attended Morehouse College. And he was very much retired and very much well in age. And we had this conversation, and I was not supposed to be able to have a conversation with him, But I did have this conversation with him. And one of the unique things that came out of that experience was that he talked about when you find yourself at a disadvantage, it's always important for you to work as hard as you can. And I never forgot that. And I've tried to apply that to every experience that I've ever had in my life, and anything that I try to do, I'll always try to do it to the best of my ability. And I think in a way, although I would not say that I'm an expert in anything, but I know that anything that I try to do, I'm going to try to do it to the best of my ability. And so I I'm hearing you saying sort of the same thing, in that the experience that you had pushed you to work extremely hard. And I think that that's a lesson that a lot of us need to continue to focus on, and continue to push forward towards.
I mean, I would tell you, Tony, that compared to many people, I had a very charmed life. So I had a very, I don't want to make it sound any more than it is. There are people every day that live in terrible poverty and in terrible pain and with huge disadvantage. So I am very sensitive to how lucky I am. I think just if I had anything, it was that dyslexia that taught me, that there are things I can do and things that I can't. I'll tell you, there's one downside to it as well, and there is one habit that probably my wife drives her crazy
Mhm.
about this from me, which is um, if I'm doing something and someone comes to join me and I think they're better at it than me, I stop helping because I'm like, oh, you're better at this, then that's great. I delegate the job to you because I don't know why I would try if you're better at it than me. So sometimes I have to be careful with that as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Where are we now? Almost 3 years after the pandemic started. How has your business changed?
I think we've all pretty much changed, and I think the home automation business has changed dramatically, and the technology business has changed. And I think the there probably are two or three things that really signal out to me. One, I think there was a move to amongst, I am telling you, the richer end of the market for more shared services, shared resources. There were people building homes with shared gyms. One of the things that happened was lots of people went back and said, I'm going to want to do this in my own home. So some of the things that maybe like home theaters that weren't popular are now, much more popular. I will tell you that there's a couple of other critical trends. One is we are much more sensitive, and this end of the market we tend to work on into health and wellness ideas. And there are many things that I think people don't do in their homes that they could do to make them healthier and more well-based places. And that's become a really huge market segment around light, around sound, around the sort of the air that you breathe. And so I think the wellness element has become very important. I think the third one, which is really fun for me, is I've always been a lover of music. And I think people have rediscovered their music. I mean, there was only so much television we could watch. I mean, once we'd seen The Tiger King and we'd watched whatever else was the hot program, lots of people have rediscovered their music and rediscovered, a family listening to music. And that's really opened up that market once again. And that's been fun to watch.
Very cool. Thank you so much for that. We have a question from Clark Lopez Waterman, and I'm going to say that's Maryland. Apologies if that's not correct. What's the biggest difference between Texas and the UK that most people would not think of?
So I lost that, Tony. If you get on my system, I got a bit of a jab. So can you repeat the question?
Okay, the question is, what's the biggest difference between Texas and the UK that
Okay.
most people would not think of?
Um, well, the UK would fit many times inside of Texas. So that's, I'll tell you that the big joke with me and my family is, for a while we had a home in Florida, and we would drive from Austin to Florida and back again. And my mother would say, "How far was that?" And I'd say it's about 1,200 miles. And it really wasn't very much to us in the US, because, we'd do 200 miles for lunch to go and see my sister-in-law. And I had to remind myself that for my mother, 1,200 miles from my parents is the other side of Moscow, Russia, which is
Wow.
this huge difference. And we hop on airplanes and we do all of those things and we drive hundreds of miles. And I think the biggest difference is people just don't travel as much, or because if they live in London, a bit like living in New York or DC or something, they're much more populated areas. They go less distances. So probably the biggest part for me between my life in Texas and my life if I was in the UK probably would be the distances we travel. My wife and I, we have no kids. We love to get in the car and drive and trip and go around America. I spent some time in a startup in the banking industry. And what I learned about America was America's not, two coasts and a center. It's 10,000 small towns and villages and communities, and every one of them is different, and every one of them has an incredible identity. And it's a great pleasure to go round them and through them. And it's just I know it's the most amazing thing. My sister and her husband recently did a trip through Memphis and Nashville and stuff. And we told them all the places we wanted them to go, which, yes, it is the big cities, but it's the small towns and it's the communities and it's the real America. And that I think is not anything you get to see from the UK, which, to be honest with you, what the image of America you tend to get from outside America is very coastal. It's very sort of New York, DC, Boston, or it's LA, California. And I think most people in the UK and most people around the world don't see. I tell you what, when I first came to Austin, first came to Texas, I was surprised how many trees there were.
Hmm.
Because, every Western I ever saw, Tony, it was just sand. And that was Texas.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can imagine. Um, if you were to retire, would you retire in Texas or the UK?
Definitely Texas. I'm not going back. I like blue skies. I think I would like to probably live somewhere in the summer that was not quite as hot as Texas, because it gets pretty hot here. But I will stay in the US. My parents, my sister still live in the UK. I'm very lucky. My father's 96 and my mother's 86, so they're alive and well. So we go back and visit them. But I have become an American. I have become a citizen. I have sworn off all foreign powers and potentates, and so I will be staying here.
And I hear what you just said, but I'm going to ask you about what the job you think the new king is doing.
It's a great question, Tony. And I have to remember I don't live there, but I will tell you I was there on the day the Queen died.
Oh,
So
wow.
so we were actually in London visiting with my parents, and I think it was probably the Thursday, and the BBC announced that they were suspending television programs for until I think they said 6 o'clock. And I said to my parents and my wife, I said, the Queen is either dead or is dying. And this is the start of the signal of the change. And it was an amazing experience to be there. On the next day, we actually had some tourist stuff to do. And we ended outside Buckingham Palace, um, you know, before it was blocked off to pay our respects. And I look, there's something slightly artificial, not slightly artificial, very artificial about a monarchy and by birthright. And we can have a conversation about whether that's a right or wrong political system. I mean, I think that's an hour's debate on its own. But I think there's something about what she did and what she stood for and what she dedicated her life to that everybody respected and everybody liked. I think he's always going, King Charles is always going to struggle because of Diana. And if you watch
Mm,
the latest series of The Crown, that will remind you. Now, like all famous people, none of this stuff is real. This is all stories we tell ourselves and imaginations we have. But I think he's never going to be what she is, because he's never going to get the opportunity to do for 60 plus years what she did. I
right.
think I think people like him. I think he's doing well. I think it's an incredibly hard thing to do, what they do, but he seems to be doing all right. I mean, the Diana story is an interesting story, and there's something Hollywood about all of that, which will always be over his head, and I'm hoping that William will take over, will reestablish a role for the monarchy in the political system of the UK, which is it's a complicated thing, but everybody needs a head of state, and she did such a great job that I think she cemented it for a while. Whether that lasts for another 100 years, who knows?
Thank you so much for that answer. Claudia Lopez Waterman is back again, and this question is, what is your philosophy on debate?
So that's a really good question. So I am an absolute fan, and maybe this is part of being Jewish as well, of debate and discussion and argument. And when I get into debate, I love it no more than halfway through we'll switch sides and try and argue it from the other side, because I think you've got to be open. We far too quickly um, accept what we believe to be true. And
Mm,
we all need to challenge ourselves all the time. And I think there's nothing worse than somebody saying, well, this is settled. It was one of the struggles I know I had in the COVID, because I am, a skeptic by nature, and a skeptic is not a cynic; it's someone who questions. And I think there are a whole bunch of things we just stopped questioning. We were told we couldn't question, and I found that a very frustrating experience. So my debate strategy is always: let's have the conversation. Let's treat each other with respect. Let's listen to each other, but let's not be afraid to challenge each other and ourselves, because it's not until you challenge yourself do you really learn. I mean, how often have we, well, let's say I do it, nobody else may do. You say something and you think to yourself, now, why do I believe that? Where did that belief come from? And I think unless you're willing to challenge yourself and be challenged and get into a debate, I'm not a big fan of the very, very structured debate that I think is more prevalent in US schools. But I love the idea that we can, debate fiercely and strong and then go for a drink afterwards, because that's the only way we're ever going to learn.
do you think it's important for young people to have the experience of having to to have an argument, to read an argument, and have to be able to defend both sides?
I absolutely do. I actually think that one of the subjects. So look, uh, like you, I probably, when I went through school, we weren't allowed to use calculators. Maybe you're younger than me. I probably should. Now everybody uses calculators to doing math, and that's fine by me. And we use word processors, and they can type. But there's a different set of skills I think young people need. And one of them is the ability to write and take criticism. And I don't mean criticism being rude about each other. I mean, it's being critical. Watch a movie, watch a television program, go to a show, be in a debate, and critically analyze what you've heard, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you believed, what you didn't believe. The art of being critical is not a bad thing, in the same way the art of being skeptical is not the same as being cynical. And I think that they are critical skills you've got to have. And I do believe, as you said, there's nothing more important in a debate. I remember at school we used to have a debating competition, and that there were my favorite debating subject once came up, and you didn't know whether you're going to be for or against the motion until it came up, was that Mickey Mouse was a subversive. And that was the debating subject. And so being faced with arguing that Mickey Mouse was a subversive was one of my favorite debates of all time. Well, he's horrid to his dog. He never pays for checks. I mean, in restaurants, I mean, learning to debate from both sides, until you've walked in somebody else's footsteps, you really don't understand them or what they believe.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was one of my experiences in high school, and we had it was the bicentennial of the United States, and one of the things that we had to do was we had a bicentennial debate team, and we had to actually read different arguments, and we had to prepare to be on either side. We never knew until the competition
Right.
what side we were going to be, whether we were going to be pro or con. And it was an interesting and a powerful learning experience to, to be able to sit in that space. So thank you for sharing that. And we have a question from, and I apologize because I can't see the name. The question is, Bryant Shan from Australia asks, as a mentor to business leaders, what advice have you received that you often pass on to others?
So I have two or three pieces that I often do. I'll tell you the most important piece of advice I was ever given was on a mountainside on the island of Mallorca, which is owned by Spain. And I was about 18, and a guy told me something. I can't tell you, Tony, how we got into this conversation. I don't know why he would say this. I don't know what led to this thought. But he said to me, make every decision with your head and execute it with your heart. And I thought, and I've thought throughout my career, that is the best piece of business advice you can really have. That you are going to have to make difficult decisions. You are going to have to make difficult choices. I've had to lay people off. I've had to shut businesses down. I've had to do things that gave me sleepless nights. But you know what? How I did them was up to me. And doing them with mercy and generosity and kindness and all of those things, to do something terrible the best possible way is, I think, an important lesson to life. And it's much harder to do, and it's embarrassing and it's difficult. But when it's about other people's lives, it's pretty important. So make decisions with your head and execute them with your heart. The other one I'll tell you is something someone said to me years ago when I was at IBM that I really tried to live to. I was going for a different job at IBM, and they said, let me tell you, Nigel, what your rep in IBM is. Your rep is when you get something, it's better when you leave it than when you got it. And I reckon that's a pretty good lesson for life, that I think if all we can do is leave things better than when we found them, then we've done a pretty good job. And that would be, you're not going to succeed in everything you do. You're not going to be the one at the end to get all the praise. The question is, did you leave it better than how you found it? And I think those are two very important lessons for us.
I'm going to ask you another question that's related to that. I think that is powerful, what you said. When you are mentoring, do you feel the need to provide an opportunity for those mentees to replace you?
So I'm going to separate out two thoughts if I could. One is coaching and one is mentoring. So I think of coaching as running up and down the sideline, shouting instructions. So one of the first things I do when I get into a job is look for the person who's going to replace me. I want to make myself replaceable. And so it's the right thing for the business. We used to say, you can be hit by a truck. I was told that wasn't a good thing to say. So I'm going to say, you could win the lottery. And if I won the $1 billion, I probably wouldn't work as hard as I do today. So it's only fair for everybody else in the company that I've got my successor lined up, that I've got a strategy. So I always look for someone to replace me. I'm always on the trying to build the bench out to make sure I don't put anybody else's livelihood or risk because I hadn't done proper preparation. I view mentoring as a slightly different thing. Mentoring is less, shouting the plays and more asking the questions. It's much more about when I'm with one of my mentees, I don't know the answer, but I can ask questions. I can try and make them think more broadly about the issue, and they'll find the answer themselves. So I'm less worried about them replacing me in the mentor-mentee relationship. I'm much more in them being all they can be. And that's really the role of the mentor to me, is to give them the opportunity to expand themselves.
Thank you so much for that answer, sir. Appreciate you. We have a question from Mike Edwards from Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Nigel, thinking of a sufficient home with suitable living in mind, what elements would you incorporate and why?
Okay, so Brooklyn is probably not a lot of space, unless because that's quite a dense place. I love Brooklyn, although I'm more of a Yankee Bronx fan, I have to admit. So just don't cut me off for that. I will tell you there are 3 or 4 elements that I would really focus on. The most important one you can get right is light. It's natural light inside your home. It's, vitamin D, it's healthiness. And at the highest end homes, what we're doing is really putting natural light in them. We're trying to make the balance between inside and outside much more natural. The same way if you've got a modern iPad or something, you at nighttime, it goes away from the blues to the reds. It's much more sensitive to night shift. We can do that to a room, to your whole house. So the first thing I think we want to get right is light. The second thing is sound. There's nothing more annoying than bad sound. And so making the sound in your home good and strong is really, really important. The third is really around climate and being comfortable. The fourth is around clutter. Clutter can have a horrible effect on people. And one of the things that when we're doing homes, we're most sensitive to is hiding the technology, trying to make it disappear, because that's less clutter. If you can focus on those 4 things in your home, then what you will do is stimulate sleep. And the most important thing we can all do to live a healthy life is get more sleep. But if you get the light wrong, and the sound wrong, and the climate wrong, and you're overstimulated by your environment, then you'll struggle to sleep. And that's the first and most important thing we should all be doing.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Nigel, for that. Brian Chan from Australia again. As an author and an avid reader, what themes resonate with you the most?
I am very, very interested at the moment in a subject called cognitive biases. So it's a sort of an extreme set of thinking. There were 2 Israeli psychologists or sociologists called Daniel Kahneman and Avon Tversky, and they did a seminal piece of work on biases and how we think. And I don't mean biases as in racist or sexist. I mean the way the brain works, the shortcuts the brain takes. And I found that's the area that I'm sort of most interested in the moment. And I'm trying to write in that area and study in that area. There's a great book by Michael Lewis called The Undoing Project, which is the sort of easy way of reading all about that. But Daniel Tversky's work, Thinking Fast and Slow, is really the best home. And so I'm really interested in that whole area about how we live. What they talked about was that we're a 2-system, our brain works on 2 systems, a sort of system 1 and system 2. The system 1 is the autopilot, system 2 is the thinking engine. And our autopilot does all sorts of things so we can get through life without it exploding on us. It tells us how to breathe, it tells us how to walk. And our system 2 is our thinking engine. If you want the best example of how this works, watch someone when their mobile phone goes. They look at their phone. System 1, which is what they've been doing, walking or driving, gets powered down, while system 2, which is their thinking engine, comes on. So they stop walking. They don't drive properly. They take power away from the bit that keeps us going day to day. and drives it towards the system too. And those sorts of cognitive biases, I think, are really a fascinating area. And it's the bit that I'm most interested in, because it's the bit when I see people make poor assumptions, when I see people jump to conclusions, that's probably something in there going on. And that's sort of the area that I'm reading and most interested in at the moment.
Thank you for sharing that. Our next question is from Liberty White, Atlanta, Georgia. Nigel, thank you for being here tonight. If you could speak to your younger self, what advice would you share?
Well, thank you, Liberty. What advice would I share? I mean, I think it depends how young we're talking. I was not a very happy kid when I was younger. I was bullied, and I was not in a good place. And I think just wanting to know that, I would find my place would be a thing that would probably be difficult for the 13-year-old me to believe was possible. Um, but I think the other advice I would give is, I'll tell you what the advice. Most people want the best for you. That most people want the best and are trying to do the best. And if they are horrid to you, they're probably unhappy. If they're mean to you, there's something going on in their life. They need your support. They need your help. And if they don't want it, they don't want it. But most people are genuinely good. Most people are genuinely want the best for those around them. And you really, if you can learn that and understand that, then you'll find your own way, because helping them find their own way is, I think, a really important thing. And I think that's probably what at 13, I wouldn't have understood that, but maybe that's a pretty important lesson.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Liberty. So what's next for Nigel Dessau?
Well, I'm enjoying my time at Bravos. I think we're doing something interesting in our market, and I think we're going to grow that business. We're about an $80-90 million business this year. I can see us growing to a $200 or $300 million business, and that I think is on the work life that a pretty important thing. I think in the sort of social world, I'm very lucky that I live in a very large building downtown Austin. I live on the 46th floor overlooking the beautiful downtown Austin. And there's a great social group in this building. And I'm really enjoying getting social time and making sure I step away from the work and be with my friends. I need to spend more time with my family. I will be going back at the end of February to see my parents. But to be honest with you, what I'd really like to do at some point in the next few years is maybe not work as hard and play a bit harder. And both you and I, Tony, meet through the office hours team, the stuff that Alex and team is doing. I'm thoroughly enjoying that. It's touched a thing that's very important to me, which is the technology and the sort of media side of things. I'd love to get more involved in that. But mostly what I want to do is to get back to doing more mentoring. When you're a CEO, it's a pretty busy life, and I would like to reinvigorate some of my mentee relationships. And by the way, some of my mentor relationships. So I have critical mentors to me, and I want to make sure I spend time with them because they teach me stuff every day too.
Can you share, team, can you share Nigel's website? And,
Yes.
and Nigel, if you can talk about it.
Yeah.
Please.
So I, as we've talked about, I've been very lucky over my life to have many good mentors. And in this modern digital world, we don't have a lot of time. So we created this thing a few years ago called the 3-Minute Mentor, which tries to put mentoring advice into 3-minute chunks. If you go back and watch some of the early episodes, there's 130 something or plus up there. Some of them are before I had the technology or the skills that I've learned on office hours. So I might want to go back and and redo those. But you'll find at the 3minutementor.com lots of little advice, lots of advice. We put some of them in a book called How to Be a 21st Century Executive. It was really the 36 most popular episodes. And so that's where I post stuff. That's where I post content. If I'm doing other things, I'll probably link it on there. But if anyone wants anything, let me know. Ask me questions. Let me help you. That stuff's really important to me, and that's just a thing I've been doing to try and make sure I keep sharing back. I'll tell you what. The funniest thing, Tony. A few years ago, the Adelaide Police Department, and we know people in Adelaide now in the office hours. Well,
Yes,
the
we
Adelaide
do.
the Adelaide Police Department sent me an email saying, "Do you mind if we use some of your videos for training our policemen?" So I don't know whether it's safe to go to Adelaide, but that's a great pleasure to think that something I've done has found all its way to over there.
That's very cool. Wow. Yes, we do know some people there. I think this is going to be the last question. What do you want the world to know?
So someone taught me a very important lesson about integrity, and I don't mean integrity about being honest and truthful, but he said, think of your life like a wheel, and the spokes of that wheel are your work and your family and your health and your community and your religion and whatever's important to giving your wheel integrity. And when one of those spokes breaks, the integrity of that wheel, the usefulness of that wheel, which is your life, struggles. And what I'm going to try and do with my life, and I would encourage all of us to do, is to look at the spokes of our wheel and what's out of integrity, what's out of correctness. And let's go fix that. Because if you can live your life, and I'm trying to live my life in integrity, and I find that's the most holistic thing I can do.
Thank you so much, Nigel Dessau, for being here with me today and sharing your wisdom and your experience and career path and your mentoring and all of the wonderful things that you have shared with us tonight. Thank you so much for doing that. And we want to thank Z98.1 FM. We want to thank all of our listeners and viewers on LinkedIn Live and YouTube. And we are also sharing on Nigel's LinkedIn Live as well. We hope that these conversations are helpful and encouraging. Last week, we had a great conversation with Dr. Nakesia Hammond. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. We want you to go back and look at our past 75 plus episodes of Conversation with Tony Mobley. I think you will find something that is hopefully extremely helpful. Conversation with Tony Mobley can be heard on 98.fm.com. And we want to thank everyone so much again for being here. We want to thank Mr. Nigel Dessau for doing the work and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you, sir.
Next week, we're going to have educators sharing their end of the year thoughts. Again, we want to thank everyone so much for participating in this conversation today. We ask that you take care and have a good night. God bless. Bye-bye.